Okay, we are recording. So, no more talking about Father anymore. All right, so where did we leave off last week? You guys are going to have to remind me here.
Here?
Yeah, where did we leave off? Here, when we left here.
We were going to do vainglory.
Did I go ahead one?
Thank you for reminding me. So we're on step 22,
Yes.
vainglory.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I am as guilty as anybody,
Yeah,
worse than.
this isn't confession. This is just a discussion about vainglory. Now, why don't we start out? We'll make this easy. What is vainglory?
It's a baby pride, small pride.
It's a small pride.
Yeah, it's pride, but it's not the big pride.
Hey, Deacon Mike, real quick, we have extra books if you don't have them.
Oh,
And then
okay.
also of the ladder divine ascent, we have that too.
Oh, we got some more. Okay, wonderful, great. Thanks,
I don't
Pat.
know who needed them.
What's that?
I don't know who needed them.
Oh, I don't know who needed them either. I know I was told to order some, so
Same ones?
that's what I requested. So,
Okay, oh, I don't know if you need some, okay.
So you remember what we paid for them?
I
Vainglory,
didn't check.
page 163.
yeah, I think I don't know what were we charging before. Well, do you have the shipping shipper?
The one that these came with is only packing slip, it's not.
Oh, it doesn't give us
come with
breakdown.
prices.
Okay, no, I didn't order them, so I don't. I don't know. I think they usually go for I think I paid like 16 for mine. Do you guys remember how much you paid for your
I don't remember.
Oh,
These were 18.
18? Is it?
Well, the 18.95 is the
Oh,
the
that's
published price.
okay.
but
Then that's.
We gave people a discount.
Oh, did we? Okay. I was gonna say that we should charge 20 just to make up some profit off it.
There you go.
No, that's not a profit center. So vainglory. Someone give me a definition for vainglory. I heard little sin or little.
a little person over
Vainglory,
here.
fully grown, can give birth to pride, which is the beginning and end of all evil.
Okay. So let's take a look. I'm on page 163. Like the sun which shines on all alike, like the way it starts that, vainglory beams on every occupation. What I mean is this. Now listen to this. This is very interesting. I fast and turn vainglorious. I stop fasting so that I will not draw attention to myself, and I become vainglorious over my own prudence.
Yep.
I dress well or badly, and I am vainglorious in either case. I talk or hold my peace, and each time I am defeated. No matter how I shed this prickly thing, a spike remains to stand up against me. All right? Yep. So, doesn't matter where you go or what you do. Isn't that interesting? Now, I think, and I can't think of the verse right now, St. Paul talks about pretty much the same thing. He says essentially the same thing that St. John is saying, that no matter what I do, and it's essentially breaks down to this here, no matter what I do, my pride, he was talking about pride, not vainglory so much, but he was talking about pride, but no matter what I do. So just because you think, well, there's that person, he's dressing well, driving a nice car or something like that, he's got to be vainglorious. Look at me, I don't dress well, I have an old car, or I walk to church.
Yeah, but
So-
you're just as vainglorious.
Exactly, and that's the whole point, because vainglory doesn't have anything to do with how much money you have, or your riches, because you could be vainglorious, his point is, you could be vainglorious, maybe even more so, in your lack of riches, right?
It's your mouth.
Yeah,
It's in what, I'm just Googling here, so I'm cheating, but it's excessive elation or pride over one's own achievements, abilities, etc.
Oh, very good.
Boastful vanity,
Okay.
empty pomp or show.
okay, and what was that first part? I didn't get that.
Excessive elation or pride over one's own achievements, ability, etc.
Okay.
Boastful vanity. So you're right, I mean, you could be boastful in your
In your
walking to
poverty.
church instead of using your car or your fancy
Yeah,
car, so yeah. either
exactly.
way you can go.
And that's what St. John's saying here too. And St. Paul says that too. I was going to look up that verse. I can't remember where that was. But he talks about the same thing. So it doesn't matter so much how much we have. Has nothing to do with it. Now, I wanted to, this is the other book, I've used this before in a study, it's by Father John Mack, I've talked about it before, and he has some stuff in here, it's based on the letter of divine ascent, but he kind of looks at it from a different perspective, and I kind of like the way he puts this, when he talks about vainglory. So, I guess the question is, how do you know when you're vainglorious?
When you say, I'm not vainglorious.
When you say you're not vainglorious? Well,
It seems to me you're always going to be vainglorious.
Seems like you are, but I don't know if that's always the case. Let me give you some quizzes here. Now, when I first got married, Susan and I, when we were young, and she would sit there. She used to get Cosmopolitan magazine, and they had all these compatibility quizzes in them. I don't know if you ever had the privilege, married couples ever had the privilege of doing that, and you find out real quick how incompatible you really are. So this is like a compatibility quiz here with you and your pride. So first question: does my behavior change when no one else is around? Now, what does he mean by that? And I think that kind of gets back to the boastful. What fun is it boasting if there's no one to boast to? Right? It just loses all of its pleasure. So the first thing you ask, does my behavior change when no one else is around? So do I, and this could be the opposite. You could say, well, yeah, I get humbler. Okay, well, maybe that's, or do you get more boastful? So are you a different person when nobody's watching, right? Do you run that red light when nobody's watching?
No, every time.
Well, I work with a lot of Indian women at work, and a lot of them I've talked to said they will not stop in Detroit. If they come up to a red light and it's dark, they will just keep on going through because they're worried about carjackings and stuff like that. I just found it was interesting, that group, and it just, it's just that kind of thing. But I mean, I think about that's more for a safety issue. Yeah. But I mean, a lot of times they say the real you is what you do when nobody's looking, or you think nobody is looking.
Right.
Yep.
So, and I just like to use that thing about the stoplight. Do you stop when you look around, you don't see anybody there? And just say, I'm not going to wait for this red light. Not from an issue of security and safety. That if it's like, drive through it. But I mean, just because it's like, I don't want to wait.
Yeah, if you can get away with it, you're going to do it.
Sure. Another thing that I try to do, not trying to be boastful, vainglorious, but when I come to a crosswalk, I try to wait until the little man turns white. And it's not because I'm afraid I'm going to get a ticket for jaywalking. For me, it's to try to practice myself in patience. To force myself to stand there, and I'll look, there'll be no cars coming, and I'll see people going, and it's just like, well, I can just hold on here. This is, just try to be patient for a few minutes. And I remember we were in Frankenmuth, and Rick was little at the time, and we were there at the crosswalk. It was, right across from the street, Bavarian Inn and Zender's. There's a crosswalk there. Well, the light was still red. And we had, I had hold of Rick on one hand here, I think Emily on the other, my wife was there, probably pushing the stroller, and we were waiting, and the light hadn't changed. Well, on the other side of the road, there was a lady, and she looks around, and she starts walking. And my son says, that lady, the light, we call him the Gainsey man. The Gainsey man didn't turn white. And she goes, don't listen, don't do what I do. That's not what you should do. She kept telling him, don't do what I do. That's not what you should do. And she kept on walking. I says, well, no, you're right. And that's why she was embarrassed, because she was called out on it.
You're right.
But my little kid, who knows, and it was just kind of funny, her reaction. Well, don't do it because I do it. Don't do what I do. You should wait. You're right. You should wait. It's like,
do as I do as I say.
Yeah, exactly. Just because you should stop, but I don't have to because I'm an adult, or I'm too busy, or chicken dinner
I'm full
waiting.
of pride.
Yeah, pride.
Is that vainglorious, though? Jaywalking?
I don't know. Let's ask the police officer. Vainglory, is that?
I mean,
that's what I would say. I'd blame it on the devil and say it was.
Depends on your attitude. It's like, I'm too important to stand here and wait with the crowd.
Right.
Yeah.
Or is that more
I'm
patience?
too important. I need to be someplace.
Yeah.
It's against an ordinance, but I don't care. I'm
I'm above it.
Yeah.
Respect or whatever.
I do stop for reds generally. 99 9/10 of the time.
That's good.
It's a start. That's a little bit of vainglory. Here's the second question. Here's a good one. Do I find myself telling others all about my spiritual efforts and blessings?
No, I don't.
Okay, hopefully not.
That's vainglory.
That's vainglory, yeah. Or number 3, do I believe my press clippings? Now, this is, what he means by that, your press clippings, so what, I guess is basically what other people say about me, or maybe write about me or something like that. Do I believe my own propaganda, I guess, my own bragging? Do I believe what I say about myself?
Look at my scrapbook.
That's right. Yeah, these are all the nice things I do. And when you start believing it, that's when the problem really comes in. I think that's more probably worse than just plain vainglory when you start to believe it. Here it says number 4 rather. Do I find myself replaying what others have said to me, or what I have said to them over and over again in my mind. What does that sound like? Didn't we talk about that in one of the earlier steps? Was that?
An LCD
I know,
behavior.
yeah, that's true, that too. Yeah, what was that? What was that one? Let's see, it was,
I thought we were talking about encourage,
yeah, we talked about that earlier. It was about,
encouraging.
no, it was, he called it letting go. Here it is, remembrance of wrongs or malice, step 9. And remember, he was talking about that, kind of the same thing. That was the one I thought was interesting, where St. John Climacus was talking about sitting outside the cell of a monk, and he heard him in there arguing, arguing with themselves, reliving this thing all the time. And that was refusing to let go of wrongs
That can be hard sometimes.
or malice. Yeah,
Yeah, especially if you're deeply hurt by what they've said.
sure. Well, yeah, and
Very hard.
But yeah, and that was, and he has this here, the same thing here as one of the questions to ask yourself. And so really, from the latter, that would be the remembrance of wrongs or malice. But he's also saying that this comes back to vainglory. Now that should be interesting. How could that come back to be vainglory? Do I find myself replaying what others have said to me or what I have said to them over and over again in my mind? Do you think maybe he's talking about good things as opposed to bad things, maybe? I don't know.
It seems like it would be that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If you're-
And
We're talking about vainglory. Yeah, so
if it falls under vainglory. I
it's
guess.
part of 9, so. Holding a
Holding a
grudge.
grudge, if it was something hurtful, I
That
don't.
would
Yeah,
lead,
hurtful.
that'd lead you down a different path.
that would lead you down a different path. That was the remembering of a wrong or malice. But if maybe if someone says something nice to you, gee, I like what you're wearing, or I like the fact that you're always here early every Sunday for church and everything like that. You go, ooh, I like the fact I'm here, and you keep playing that over and over. Maybe it's more replaying the compliments in a way. And what would that do for you? Why? Yeah, puff you up. It builds you up. It's good. It's good to be reminded, right?
Right.
A person might only say it once, but you can say it to yourself a lot of times, right?
Well, it's just nice to hear something
Sure,
positive.
sure. And that was something too. I think it was it last week we were talking
Susan
about
hit
that.
on that.
Yeah, and I thought she made a very good point. And again, we got to be very careful when we look at this, because in the extreme, it is for the monks, all right? It's by a monk for a monk in that extreme. So you don't want to turn around and constantly compliment in the fear that you might injure them, and from the standpoint that they might be puffed up. They might be vainglorious. They might be boastful. It might be detrimental to them. But as far as we're concerned, I think, and I agree with Susan, I think it's good that we do take the time, that we do compliment, that we do thank people for what they do, because people do a lot of stuff here. I mean, things that a lot of times we don't know about, or just things that they do, out of love and out of their heart. And, they obviously aren't doing it for someone's praise or, pat on the back or anything like that. They're doing it because they want to or they feel they need to. But still, it's also good, I think, once in a while
To be
to hear.
reminded.
Yeah,
of a
just
compliment.
let people know that it's happening.
We
But
noticed your good deed, yeah.
exactly. You were noticed, that your effort wasn't ignored or unnoticed. And so, but again, we have to guard against not only for ourselves, fishing for compliments, right? Hey, what do you think about that? You see what I just did? Isn't that great? What do you think about that? Not doing that, or complimenting people to the point where they may have a problem with it. And I think we can kind of know, I guess, if there's somebody that we find, well, every time I compliment him, he's kind of gets a big head or something like that. Or I compliment him and then he stops doing it, so I'm not going to compliment him anymore. You did a great job at that. Oh, okay. Now we won't do it anymore. So just some things to think about. Here's another question. Do I act and talk as if I have experientially known spiritual truths that I have only read about? Okay, so this is kind of tough here. So, do I act and talk as if I have experientially, if I've experienced, known spiritual truths that I've only read about?
I would say that would be vainglory.
Yeah.
Maybe even lying, huh?
Yeah, it's more of lying. Yeah. I mean, you don't, and again, you don't know, but that's a good point. But I mean, if you read about, I'm going to go to an extreme, the uncreated light, And you say, yeah, I've experienced that before. Yeah, I do it all the time, when nobody's looking at, I mean, I guess that's at an extreme, but I mean, some of the things that you read about, some of the extremes that you might read about, especially from the church fathers, and a lot of times you say, oh yeah, I've experienced that. And maybe it was just something you read about and you try to relate to. I don't think, hopefully we don't have a problem with that. I mean, most people would kind of know if, maybe like if you were fighting, like when we were talking about, I think I was reading in here about fighting demons and stuff like that. I mean, but again, you don't know. But from the standpoint, other people might not know. You could say, well, I battle demons. I go home and battle them every night. I mean, physically battle demons. Just like as he was talking in the one about fear, right? About being afraid. He said, go out there and go out into the dark and find the demons and thrash at them and all this other stuff. Well, maybe someone will say, I do that all the time. Well, okay. I mean, but to what end? And most of the time, people who experience that generally don't go around and talk about it. I'm not saying brag about it, but don't go around and talk about it. So that might be something that just leads to vainglory, that you're doing something more or something better than you really did. Next question, do I become discouraged and quit when no one notices what I do or I do not receive the praise and thanksgiving I think I deserve? That's a good one. So if we do something and you do it and you turn around and say, well, nobody said thanks.
Right.
Yeah.
I do this all the time. I come in early, I stay late. Nobody says thanks. I'm not doing it anymore. They don't appreciate it anyways.
It happens.
And that's easy to get into.
In every organization.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Not just in the church. You're right. Every organization where people volunteer
Right,
or
10% do 90%.
Sure. It's always the same, no matter where you go. I mean, even sometimes at work, it's the same thing.
It's work, churches, other fundraising events, whatever
Right.
it is.
Yeah, and that's kind of expected. Sometimes certain people are just unable for whatever reason to pull up as much as they usually do, and sometimes they just don't want to. I don't know, but that's the thing. Do I become discouraged or quit when nobody notices? I'm never going to do that again. So that's one that we definitely need to guard against. Here's another one. Do I hide my sins and failings from others, even to the point of lying or shading the truth, so that my true faults are not discovered by others?
I think all of them are vainglory.
Yeah, so you got to ask yourself, do I do that? Is there some fault or shortcoming that I'm trying to hide? I don't know, it could really be anything. Maybe some people are addicted to gambling or pornography or something like that. And I'm going to say, oh, no, I don't do that. Or I only look at it when it pops up on the screen or something. Kind of play it down. I mean, that could be... Now, why would that be vainglory? I mean, that's lying. Just like you said, it sounds well, I'm lying. Yeah, it is. But why would that be vainglory?
No, it makes yourself look good.
Right. So really, yeah, so as we're talking about the definition of it, vainglory is trying to make people believe that you are something you really are not. Right? Next one, do I become defensive when I am criticized? Never, right? Never. I do something and someone says, oh yeah, you could have done it better, could have done it this way, or that was wrong. Yep, that never happened to me. Do I feel the need always to make sure that everyone knows why I did something? That's kind of interesting. So if you do something, just something here around the church, it's tell somebody, and this is why I did it, and it's just kind of going on again to try to let somebody know maybe how spiritual you are. Well, yeah, because I love God so much, I thought I'd come in and do this and wash the walls or something like that, and then that way everyone knows.
But you got to tell more than one, and then you got to tell, because that first one may not have shared it. So you need
that's a good point. Yeah,
another, and just make sure everybody knows.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Even Father might put in a bulletin for you.
Sure,
if you want.
because-
Well, he certainly will if you give him the write-up, right? And just say, here, Father. I mean, I don't know if you really want to put this in the bulletin
Do you
next
have
month, but in
room for
case
it?
you do, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can find some room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, those are
So vainglory falls under all of those different things. So, and they talk about here on page 163 and 164, they talk about the 7 deadly sins, all right? We probably heard these before. It says, most of us are familiar with the notion of the 7 deadly sins, gluttony, lust, avarice, despondency, often referred to as sloth. It's kind of interesting. Anger, pride, and envy. Then he goes on to say, but in much Eastern literature, 8 deadly sins or vices are mentioned. This list was probably introduced by Evagrius of Pontus. And he goes, gluttony, lust, avarice, dejection, despondency, anger, and then he throws in something called vainglory and pride. And that vainglory and pride, that I guess that leadway is kind of how St. John in the latter puts it the same way. So he's seeing, conquering vainglory as a prerequisite in order to conquering that pride. Which I guess, I always thought vainglory was pride.
I do too.
But here he's talking about vainglory in a little bit different light. Bottom of page 164, this is from St. John. He says, vainglory fully grown can give birth to pride, which is the beginning and end of all evil. Right? So we'll talk about that when we get to pride, about how, as he says, it's the beginning and end of all evil. Everything, if we want to look at all sins, in one way or another, start or end with pride. Right? If you want to look at the fall, if you want to look at Adam and Eve in the garden, right? Some people I know in my class, because it's a Roman Catholic seminary, they like to say, well, the sin was that they had sex, that they noticed they were naked. That was the sin, and that's not really how it's generally viewed, at least in the Eastern churches. It's viewed as they felt that they could get along. Adam and Eve felt that they could get along without God, essentially, right? God told them, everything here is all yours. Whatever you want. Only one thing is that tree. Don't eat from that. And there was that pride that was helped, certainly, by the devil, by Satan, by the serpent, right? Who convinced Eve that, well, no, surely it won't die. He's just afraid that you're going to be as smart as him. You're going to be as good as him. That's why he doesn't want you to eat it. Then pride kicks in. Well, gee, I can be as good as him. So eat. Gives it to the old man. He eats too, and now they're both, just as smart as God. Well, that was something that they were probably not ready for. And if you read, the literature, the fathers and things, that's what they said. They said, well, eventually Adam and Eve would be aware of that, but it would be at a point where they could handle it. So if you look at it from the standpoint of children, think about little kids when they learn to walk. It's hard to keep clothes on them. Right. They'll strip down in a minute and run outside in a snowbank, trying to keep shoes on them or clothes or hats or something. And that's how it's kind of viewed with Adam and Eve. They were babies. They were infants. And really, if you look at it, it doesn't even say whether or not we picture them because of the Western. All the paintings and maybe the icons that we see and stuff like that. But they're always full-grown, man and woman type.
Right,
Adults, yeah. But I don't know, maybe God did create them as little tiny babies. It didn't say how big man, as in human, or woman, as in woman, human, was when God created him. Did they create them already fully grown, or did he create them as little babies and then they lived and worked in the garden and he was essentially bringing them up as children and teaching them, no, you don't do this, you don't do that. And they could wander around naked, and God fed them, God took care of them, gave Adam a job. Like a teenager, right? Here, you need a job. So, they had these things to do, and God brought them up as they were old enough to handle those experiences. That's one way of looking at it. So to turn around and say, to put it on that, and just to say, well, it's because they looked at they were naked and they had sex. Well, I don't know, that might be a draw that's not really even stated in the Bible.
Yeah.
Vainglory, down at page 64 here, vainglory being the beginning of pride is a spiritual sin. As such, it easily works its way into the very fabric of spiritual life. Up at the top of 165, Christians are apt to make pious excuses to justify this passion and to fool everyone into thinking that they are acting in the name of God rather than for vainglory, as St. John points out. Dread vainglory urges us to pretend that we have some virtue which does not belong to us. It encourages us with the text, "Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good deeds." That's from Matthew 5:16. What does he mean by that?
our light, we're bringing attention to ourselves,
Sure.
and it's puffing us up. And in a way, that light is, it's a form of bragging. Look at how great I am.
hmm So as part of that, because he states here that it's a spiritual sin, do you think it's pretty easy to go ahead and grab a verse out of the Bible and now use that to justify my vainglorious actions? I mean, that's essentially what he's talking about here. Let the light shine before men so they will see your good deeds. Well, if I don't shine a spotlight on it, they'll never see them, right? Now, why do you think in that when this is written in Matthew, why do you think that? What's the purpose of that? Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good deeds. What light is he talking about? Is he talking about the good deeds you're doing necessarily?
Your spiritual light,
Yeah, your spiritual light.
to bring
Just-
others to
Yeah.
Christ.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And again, this is not to say that, well, it gets back to faith and works. Well, I have all the faith, so I don't need to do these works because, it says that works are dead. Works are, part of the law, all this other things. We live by the law, we should live by faith. Well, that's true, but then we learn that show me your faith by your works, as St. James is saying. And that is the actualization, the way that people can see that. And I think people will see, it's just like if you go to a monastery or something like that, you can sense people are spiritually advanced, I guess, certainly more spiritually advanced by me. And I don't have to sit there and watch them all day and do all kinds of good deeds or spiritual stuff to kind of get that feeling that person is probably more spiritually advanced, more spiritually aware of what's going on than I am. It's just that sense that you get. And I think that's the kind of light that you can shine on people through your life. But then again, as he's trying to make the point here, if we take all of the verses and say, well, the Bible says, feed the poor. So look at me, I am now feeding the poor, so I can shine my light on all you people who are out there feeding the poor and make a big show of it, right? I mean, you're accomplishing the same thing, right? Aren't you feeding the poor?
Just by doing it, yeah.
Just by doing it, yeah. But the difference is, what is the reason? What is the purpose? What is the spirit behind it? Whose spirit is behind it? And why are you doing it? Now, if you're doing it to try to get the praise of people, or I guess to get the tax break or something like that, and not doing it out of the love of Christ, then it is not certainly to your advantage, and it does fall easily into vainglory. He writes on, he says, do not conceal your sin because of the idea that you must not scandalize your neighbor. Of course, this injunction must not be adhered to blindly. It will depend on the nature of one's sinfulness. This is kind of interesting. He's talking about disguising your sins. Now again, we got to be careful here, when we talk about some of these things that he's writing about, because he's talking about this in a monastic setting. Now, he's not saying here necessarily that you need to hide. It says, do not conceal your sins with the idea that you must not scandalize your neighbor. Don't be afraid to let people know of your shortcomings because you're afraid that they will be scandalized. So if people find out that, Deacon Mike comes in here on church and then he goes home and drinks until he passes out, right?
And beat Susan.
Beats his wife.
Beats his wife.
You know what I'm saying?
That's two things.
I know. Yeah, that's two things. So I mean, if I did that, I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and confess this to everybody. You might want to be a little careful about that because, I mean, not so much what people would think about me necessarily. I think they probably already, but I mean, it's what would they think about the church? How would that reflect on St. Mary Magdalene? They go, oh yeah, well they have a deacon there. They have a member of the ordained clergy who comes to church and acts all holy and everything, then goes home and gets hammered and passes out or something like that. That's not a very good witness. So when they talk about this, and again, it's not to say, well, don't confess your sins. You have to confess your sins. But he says here, he puts it this way, he says, to be scandalized is in fact nothing more than a euphemism for being judgmental. So if people know all your sins, if the general public knows all your sins, What do you think would happen in this case here, as he's saying? I mean, realistically, if everyone knew all my sins, I don't think you guys would be sitting in the same room with me right now.
I think everything that you're involved
that's
in
the
then
thing.
comes into question, what you do probably,
Okay,
what you say.
right,
I mean, if you're leading and teaching and then doing something completely opposite, obviously
Right.
it discredits, which, I mean, it changes everything, how people are going to listen to you or not, the old hypocrite type of a thing.
Sure.
I mean, that's the problem with all people that preach Christianity to others, and then, they're using judgment at the same time in criticizing people,
Mhm.
yet they take pride.
Sure,
They're
sure.
glorious, whatever, that they think that they're doing something good.
Right, yeah, that they're doing something better. And that's something that we all, and I'm sure everybody's heard this before, but we all, every one of us, needs to admit is that we're sinners, that all of us fall short. And it's not a matter of trying to tell somebody to do something that I wouldn't try to do myself. If I say, well, you have to fast during the nativity fast coming up, you have to fast. Everybody need to fast. Take those donuts or whatever, those, cupcakes and cream cheese and all this stuff. Take it out of here. We're fasting. And then I go home and I start, frying up a steak and I get my baked potato with sour cream and cheese and everything, and sit there munch away. And someone rings the doorbell and you'll go, what are you doing? You just had us throw out all the bagels and cream cheese. You're telling us we're fasting, and that is definitely a very poor witness. That would be, and they talk about this right here too, being judgmental. Then people would look at that and they would certainly judge me, and maybe I would say, yeah, I deserve to be judged, but we're not supposed to. I mean, you don't know what's going on, but I mean, you can open yourself up to that judgmental type of situation where someone would say, because that's what they're talking about here. They said for scandalize your neighbor. It says it's a euphemism for being judgmental. So then your neighbor will be judgmental. Now, how does that work for them in their spiritual life?
Well, two examples, Jimmy Swaggart and the Baker family. I mean, it all came tumbling down. How do you not, if you're sitting in the pew, how do you not be judgmental?
Yeah,
I mean, it's tough, and if you are being judgmental, then that's wrong for us to do that, yet this man was up here.
There's a lot of collateral damage because,
Oh, yeah.
because then whatever they preached or whatever they taught, then that comes into question. You don't want any part of it.
Right, and
Exactly.
it all falls on you, and then your friends are looking, see, you went to that church.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Go there. I mean, it's, like you said,
Yeah, yeah.
that is
Yeah,
major.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah, because and that's the thing too. When we talk about just sins, you don't sin in, how to put it, you don't sin in private. Like case in point, I'm going to go out and I'm going to have an affair. That's nobody else's business. Nobody else's business but me and the woman I'm having the affair with, and she's an adult, so nobody needs to care, right?
But are you
And
married?
yeah, I'm married.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. But I'm just giving an example. So it's nobody's business, even if I wasn't. But it's nobody else's business, all right? I'm not hurting anybody.
But if you're not married to her, and then you're committing a sin.
You're committing a sin, right? It's adultery.
Adultery, yes.
And if you are married, and she's married, or all these other possibilities,
Really committing
there you go. Now, this what you could say, victimless. That's what I was looking for. This victimless crime is now suddenly having some collateral damage, a little bit of fallout, and you can see the ripple effect getting bigger. I hear the same thing. People say, well, if I want to take drugs or something like that, or drink, be an alcoholic, I'm the one who's hurt. Don't you worry about me. It's none of your business. Well, you got to look at that ripple effect. You're not just hurting yourself. No sin is done in isolation. All sins affect other people, and I just see it as like adding to that big pot of sin that's all over here, all over the world, right? Somebody will sin, and you say, well, I'm just going to take some drugs. Okay, well, now you have to buy it from somebody who's smuggling drugs in, who's breaking the law smuggling drugs. Who knows what collateral damage he caused to get those drugs to you, right? You take those drugs, maybe you pass out, maybe you ran your car into another car, you injure somebody, you kill somebody, right? Now your sin is starting to multiply and take the lives of other people. What about your family? What about if you lose your job?
They may say, I'm not hurting anybody because I don't have a family, there's no one to care. But if you injured someone else, now You
Mhm.
have created an issue.
But you also got to think too that everybody out there, you can say, well, nobody cares about me or it's not their business. Well, everybody has family, they have friends, right? They have a community that cares for them in one way or another. Everybody does, whether they know it or not or really care. There's people out there that are affected by you and everything that you do. I would say even the good things you do, but certainly the bad things you do, they're going to feel that fallout, that ripple effect. And that gets back to the good things. I mean, I believe that the good things have that little ripple effect. You don't, just as you don't sin in isolation, I don't think that you do good deeds necessarily in isolation either. So if you do something, you say, hey, like these bags here, I'm going to give it to this homeless guy. All right? So that homeless guy, I don't know what he's going to do with it. Maybe he's going to sell it. Maybe he's going to use it. Doesn't matter. That's fine. And it stops there. Well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe he takes something and hands it to somebody else, and that person is blessed. Maybe that was just the one thing he needed. I hate to get too dramatic here, but maybe that was the one thing he needed that he could clean up a little bit and go in there and get that job that he was looking for. Now he's on the path of getting off the streets. And you don't know. You don't know how those things go. So, really I guess we're get back to where we were on the story. Those are the good deeds. Those are the lights that shine. But again, we got to make sure that doesn't turn into vainglory. So he talks about on 166 about fools for Christ, and that fools. I don't know if you've ever read the lives of some fools for Christ, or I know in Dostoevsky and in the Brothers Karamazov they had a fool for Christ, and it was kind of interesting. The lives of these people, and the thing is that they pretend to be, I guess, crazy. They pretend to be fools. A lot of times they'll live in the streets and they'll eat out of trash cans and stuff like that. And you will look at them and you will say, man, there is somebody who is a drug addict, or there is somebody who is the worst, the bottom of society. But really, they're some of the most pious people in the world. So they talk about the greatest examples of Christians who are vainglory are saints known as fools for Christ on page 166. These are rare and remarkable saints. They do not wish to be deemed holy, but instead opt to be condemned as unrighteous. They did not seem to care much about scandalizing their brothers. They broke the mold, overturning the stereotypes of saints in the conventions of society, especially religious society. They did not care for social decorum or politeness. They concealed their asceticism, trying to give the impression that they did not observe the fasts of the church and that they were hypocrites. St. John in this chapter on discernment gives us a little example of such behavior. And it goes on. A brother once suffered a disgrace, but in his heart he was untroubled by it, and in his mind he was prayerful. However, he lamented aloud, and by feigned passion hid his dispassion. Another pretended to be eager for the job of the Father Superior, when in fact he had no wish for it at all. And how am I to speak of the chastity of the brother who entered a brothel for what appeared as a determination to commit sin, and who actually enticed the harlot to take up the ascetic life? So what's he talking about here? Very simply, don't judge a book by its cover, I guess.
Yeah. So these would be monks that would be going out and doing this, or?
Well, they could be monks, but a lot of times they're not even part of a monastic order.
What about the sentence that you read that said,
Which one's that?
they did not seem to care much about scandalizing their brethren? What does that mean?
So when we talk about scandalize it, again, that gets back to being judgmental. So they didn't care about being judged by their brothers.
I don't understand the point of what they're doing exactly. I mean, they're trying to act the opposite of the way that they're portraying themselves. Is that what they're doing?
Well, they are the opposite of what they're portraying themselves are. They are the opposite. I think a lot of times, if you look at the lives of the fools for Christ, by acting as they do, they can get away with a lot more stuff that someone who was considered pious would be able to do. Just as they're talking about here, entering into a brothel here. The brother who entered a brothel for what appeared as a determination to commit sin, we know what he's talking about, but who actually enticed the harlot to take up the ascetic life. Now, if he was the monk, the well-known ascetic, holy monk,
Sure.
how far, and really, do you think that would have much of an impact maybe on the people that he is trying to witness to? So by him being a fool for Christ, he can get away with that kind of stuff because people would say, look at you, you're going into the brothel. And you go, yeah, so what? I'm going into the brothel. And they think, oh, that guy's a sinner.
Right.
Who wasn't here around him? Well, really, his purpose was to, like in this case, they say to entice the harlot to come and join the convent, you know?
To get into the brothel.
Yeah, to
But do you
get
think
rid of
that
that.
in helping to save her life, that maybe others were lost because they saw him?
See, now that could be. That's a good question. So, I mean, that's a good question. Also, when you see the Fools for Christ, if people don't understand where they're going with this,
Right.
because what they'll do a lot of times is they'll call out things that they see in public or something like that. You know, they'll see. I guess you could say almost like a stylite. Saint Simeon, the stylites. Maybe they were even like fools for Christ, because from what I read, they would stand on those pillars in the middle of the market, and they would go down there and they would yell at people, "Look at you! Look at you! Look at you!" and condemn people, condemn them for how they dressed, how they acted, what they were doing down there. You know,
I'd make
how come you're not in church? You know, and all this other stuff. It's like, and what do people say? Yeah, he's just a fool. He's just an idiot on top of a, you know. They hand him up a bucket, and that, you know, it's like, who cares about him?
Right.
But really, if you stop and think about it, a lot of times that is where you get maybe some of your best inspirations from, are maybe some of what we would consider to be the worst people, right? So if you have somebody who is totally foolish, or appears to be sinful, at least out of his mind, up there on a pillar yelling down at me, maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe I can, and he can maybe pique their interest or their conscience in a way that someone who is perceived as being totally holy, like the bishop walking down there and saying, you go to church and all this other stuff, you know, it's like, okay, that's his job, and blah, blah, blah. But maybe, you know, this fool who comes by and says something along that line, or does something kind of odd, you think, you know, maybe there's something going on here. So I'm sorry, Ellen.
No, I was gonna, this first sentence about the brother is very difficult for me to grasp, because he's there and then he's not, and then he's this and then he's not. And the second one, the monk who, the saint rather, who pretended to be eager for the father superior job. What would happen if he got the father superior job? He
Yeah.
really didn't want it.
And then he had no wish for it.
Yes, the last sentence for the, another pretended to be eager for the job of father superior, when in fact he had no wish for it. And if he was politicized enough, he got the job, but he really didn't want it. Now what?
Well, he had it.
But he didn't want it.
I'm
This
just kidding.
first one is in my, he's there and he suffered a disgrace, but in his heart he was in trouble. Yet in his mind he prayed. And then he lamented aloud, and by feigned passion hid his dispassion. So I don't know where he is now.
See, like, I don't
with
get
his
it.
Well,
struggle.
no,
it's a hypocrisy kind of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Kind of, but think, okay, let's take the first one. Brother who suffered disgrace in his heart, but was untroubled by it. So someone came by and did something to you. Think about something that they would do. They said something mean or did something mean to you. And you weren't troubled in your heart. Now, in that truest sense, all right, and you were prayerful and you really put it aside. Maybe that person that did it to you had no idea that they were acting this way and hurting people. Maybe they would go around and say, well, it didn't hurt him, so I'm doing the same thing to other people. Again, you gotta put it in the situation, all right?
Okay.
But he turns around and laments aloud and feigns passion for his hid dispassion. So he says, you hurt me. Oh, just to pretend like he was really hurt when in reality he wasn't. Is it hypocrisy? I don't know. I think you gotta look at what the reasoning behind it is. If that is, this again, remember, this is the fool for Christ, and what they'll do is they will do things in order to bring people to some sort of spiritual understanding. They'll do kind of goofy things. I think about, everyone's seen Ostrov, that movie Ostrov, the island.
Yes.
Oh, if you get a chance, yeah.
Oh, the monk.
The monk.
The monk who took the boots off the big monk, and you don't need this, and he burned
What did he do?
everything.
And what,
Yes.
right, remember? Because he took the
Yes.
boots and he threw them. And then remember what he did with his, he had a bed. He said, who was it? The bishop or someone gave me this bed. He was walking with the bed because his house burned down.
Yeah.
You got to see it. And it's kind of a long story, but the first time you see it, I mean, I couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with this guy. But then, as you kind of understand where he's going here, you can see that he was essentially a fool for Christ.
Now that you, yes, he clearly was.
Yeah. Now, all those things, you can say, why the heck would he take those boots, cut them up? Why would he take that bed and throw it inside the fire?
But when he took the boots and he took all of the good things from the bishop,
Right.
all of the wealth, the bishop,
The Mark of Andre.
yeah, he had no business having all of those goods. He really didn't.
Well, and his point was, whether he had a right or not, his
No,
point
I
was
shouldn't
that,
say right.
yeah, but
Strong.
you notice how he was kind of bragging, kind of boastful.
Yes,
This he had to go sleep inside the boiler room or whatever. And so he's carrying this bed, this real nice bed. It's like a feather bed or something like that. And this guy's walking along carrying this bed, and he was talking about how the bishop gave him this bed, and he was really proud of it. He liked it. So he takes it and goes to throw it on a pile of coal. Well, the monk there, he says he sees the devil in it, and he starts fighting with it and stuff. And what does he do? Does he throw it in the water? The bed goes in the water or something. Anyways, he gets rid of it. Then the other time when he took the guy walked by, he took the log and threw it on him. Threw it at
Well, the normal monk just thinks he's insane.
He
And at the
puts
end of the
soot
movie-
on the handle of the door all the time.
Yeah.
And so the guys would come by and they'd open the door and he'd go like this. And he'd have this. And so
It's Ash Wednesday.
yeah. And he gets this. And it's cold. It's
Always.
cold. I want to say like creosote. It's real sticky stuff. And so he'll see the guy coming. He'll rub it on the door handle and run inside. And then the
This is
other
the guy
monk
that was
there-
wrestling with the bed?
yeah, the rest of the bed.
Okay.
But when you see all this stuff and you think, what an idiot. But in the beginning of the movie, it kind of shows how he got there. And then, I mean, even right up to the end, remember when he had that, they made him the coffin and everything because he said he was going to die?
Well, I think he did a good, the exorcism, he did the exorcism on the girl.
Yes.
That was very, I mean,
Wow.
Father showed the movie here.
I think I remember them talking about it. I've never
Yeah,
seen it.
it,
I have it. I'll bring it if you want to see it. It's got English
Well, I don't want to
subtitles.
see it now.
Oh, it's-
Spoiler alert, man.
oh, no, there's a lot more.
There's
There's a lot
too much
more.
to it, yeah.
Okay.
And you really should
You want to see it?
more than
I'll
once.
bring it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you gotta
it's
understand
it's all in Russian, but there's English subtitles, and I've got a little card that explains how to bring it up. It's very good, but that is
That's somebody free
Fool
of
for
vain.
Christ.
That,
Is
exactly,
he
that
free of
is,
vainglory then?
yes,
Because that's what it says, that first sentence.
yes,
Yeah.
and that is definitely,
I'm trying
and
to
you'll.
understand that, what this phrase says, how they could be fool for Christ.
Mm-hmm. And if you watch that movie and see how he acts and the reasoning behind it, then you kind of go, okay, he could just do stupid stuff and get away with it because people say, yeah, he's a fool. But all of those things have very real spiritual meaning behind those, and in a way, he's doing them a favor. He's saving them, as it were. All right.
it's like a court gesture, but a spiritual court gesture.
There you go. That's a good way of putting it. That's a real good way of putting it. Yeah. Because a court gesture can get away with stupid stuff like make fun of the king.
Right.
Nobody else can do that. Anybody else would be, thrown in prison or tortured. But the court gesture, because he's a fool.
It's his
Right.
job.
But a lot of times, just as you say, a lot of times the kings will see that wisdom in that hypocrisy and that idiocy that this guy is performing and go, oh, wait a minute, I see where you're going with this. It's the same thing
Might be
with
a
this.
message there, actually.
That really is, yeah. That's exactly what it
Almost
is.
a conscience.
It's a conscience. It kind of piques that conscience that you have. That's always been there. It's just sometimes you need to have it piqued. All right. But yeah, so let's see. Is there anything else we want to talk about here in Vainglory? It's a long chapter. I don't. Here on page 168, just some things I got highlighted. The difference between a vainglorious religious person and any other vainglorious person is simply one of taste. I thought this was interesting. One person seeks to be admired for the clothes he is wearing, another seeks the same admiration for his priestly vestments. One wishes to be admired for singing on stage and another for chanting in church. One wants to be thought of as tough and cool, another as prayerful and humble. It is the same vainglory in all of them. He says, but the religious kind of vainglory is worse because it passes itself off as religious devotion, as something virtuous. So this whole vainglorious stuff, like he's saying here, is really the same, whether it's in the church, huh?
I said, I'm sorry, I had a moment of excitement because I realized that everybody was here, and if I got the rest of the stuff, then you can all only put the bags together. It'll take 5 minutes after we're done. So
5 minutes.
Yep.
hey, we could do 500 in however
Yeah.
long it took us.
That's
we could
right.
do 50 in.
Yep. So vainglory. I'll tell you what. We have a few minutes here. I want to end at 8, and then we can go ahead and jump on the bag. So step 23, pride. We already talked
Just
about.
in time.
Yeah, just in time. So we talked about vainglory and about various other things, fools for Christ and stuff like that. Now let's talk about pride. And again, that's another long chapter. I don't think we need to talk about every word of it, but I think as he stated before, this is the greatest of all sins. Pride begins, I'm at the top of 171. Pride begins where vainglory leaves off. So this is just a natural progression, I guess. If you're vainglorious and allow that vainglory to develop, it's going to develop into pride. Its midpoint comes with the humiliations of our neighbor, the shameful parading of our achievements, complacency, and unwillingness to be found out. It ends with the spurning of God's help and the exalting of one's own efforts and a devilish disposition. Right. So its midpoint comes with the humiliation of our neighbor. What does that have to do with pride? The humiliation of our neighbor.
Well, by putting them down, you puff yourself up.
Sure, of course.
What do you mean? What does it mean by mid?
So if you look, what he's trying to do is trying to show this as a line. All right. So he says you start out with vainglory. All right. Okay. So if you look at it, vainglory starts here. Okay. Now I'm going to get into this. Midway, you're over there busily putting down your neighbors. He says, the shameless parading of our achievements, complacency, and unwillingness to be found out. So you don't want people to know how prideful you are, even though it's probably going to be pretty obvious. The shameless parading of our achievements. Well, it's like we talked about with vainglory, right? It's no fun if nobody knows about it, right? I mean, what's the sense of being proud when you can't brag about it? Right. So that's the midpoint. But the problem is he's saying that as this is developing, I guess as you sink, maybe instead of going like this, we should go like this. As you sink lower and lower and lower, it says it ends with the spurning of God's help. What does he mean by that?
God turns away.
What's that?
God,
Well, you're turning your back on God.
Right. Now, how would you spurn God's help? What's one real good way of spurning God's help?
I can do this.
I can do it on my own.
Do it on my own?
Yeah.
Cut yourself
put the
off
other people
from
down.
everything.
Cut yourself off, right? Maybe stop praying. I don't need to.
Stop
I don't
coming to church.
Stop coming to church. All those different things, right? Those kind of helps. The sacraments. I don't need those.
We all know people that have fallen away from the faith. I'm guessing
Yeah, unfortunately,
for
yeah.
various
Well, they
reasons.
feel, they said, I'm a good person, I don't need to go to church to be a good person.
That's the one thing.
That's a popular one.
One thing I hear all the time. Yep.
Yeah.
If I don't break the laws,
I'm a good
I don't
person.
kick the dog.
God's a loving guy.
Exactly. He'll understand.
Yeah.
Or maybe I got time
God is
to.
everywhere.
God is everywhere, even on the green at Oak Hollow Golf Course, right? Or in the bar, or wherever you want to be. God's there, right? And so that's a good excuse for not participating.
Did you hear that? What was the father that said that, you have to, we need water to survive, and there's water everywhere in the air, but you actually have to go to a fountain to get nourished.
Right.
The same thing with the church.
That's-
God is everywhere, H2O is everywhere.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I forgot who said that, but it was a beautiful analogy. Kind of
Yeah. I just read that somewhere. Yeah. But that's a good point. And it's the same thing with our attitude about church. And also, if we allow that pride, going from vainglory into pride, if we allow that to progress unchecked, and I think, again, really the best way to help check it is to stay within the church, is to seek God's help, to understand that. I mean, hopefully that's what you're getting when we come here to church, that we're getting the teaching, that we're getting the sacraments, that we're getting those things that are kind of bringing us to a realization of how sinful, of how needy we really are of God's mercy and God's help.
We will continue to fall, we'll continue to go from various different steps of the ladder, and we just have to repent, confess, and as long as we keep trying and working towards that,
Mhm.
then we can plan on some kind of or hope to gain some kind of spiritual life, some kind of union with God.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a as we say with salvation, it's a journey. I was saved, I'm being saved, and I will be saved. It's a continual journey because we understand that we're going to fall, and the sin is not so much in the falling; it's the refusal to pick yourself up. Part of that picking yourself up is confession, is reconciliation back with the church, recognizing that sin and confessing that sin, and getting right with God. I mean, that's part of that picking yourself up.
Confession is a complete denial of your pride.
Yes,
And that's something that people sometimes forget, even when they're standing there.
that's a good point.
It's a complete denial of your pride.
To verbalize some of the stupid stuff that you do and think and say, and and when you hear that out loud, because I know back in my previous days, it's like, well, you just confess it to God. You just confess it to God. Well, I tell you what, it does seem a lot different when you're vocalizing it and you hear it echo throughout the church. But I mean,
Hopefully not that loud.
yeah, oh yeah. Don't you? I mean, oh, never mind. I won't judge. No. So as we talk about this pride, and that's a tough thing to do. How do we teach, especially kids, not to be prideful? I mean, in this day and age, that's the whole thing. Almost our whole existence revolves around pride.
But isn't there a difference between pride and proud? I'm proud of my child.
Mm-hmm.
Is that puffing myself up because I'm proud of, I struggle with that.
No,
But you want to build confidence.
you want to build confidence, but again, I guess it is to what end? I mean, in one part, who are you building up?
The person you're
You're complimenting?
Complimenting, yeah.
Okay. Or you're building up yourself. Look at my children.
They're doing what I want them to do.
There you go, yeah. They would all be basket weavers if it wasn't for me giving them that direction, that push, and,
Okay, that I see as being prideful. But when she tells me about this experiment she was doing, or the fact that she may have gotten 100 on an exam, I'm really happy for her because I know.
Oh, yeah, you're happy.
Okay,
You're happy.
so
Because they're struggling.
I'm proud of her,
Sure.
and I tell her that too. But when does that become pride? If I'm out bragging to people, I understand.
It's not so much what you're saying, it's how it's received. So if you're saying something as a compliment to somebody and they're receiving it as something that builds up their confidence, then that's not simple. But if they're seeing it, if they're now children are, they have to get to that level, okay, obviously.
Right.
They don't
But
know yet,
it's more about the receiver as it is the giver. So in other words, and we talked about this when we talked about compliments, It's how are you receiving the praise of others? Are you receiving it as something prideful and saying, well, of course I did good because that's who I am? Or is it, you know what, I worked really hard and I feel like I deserve this. There's a difference in the
Okay, that I
connotation.
understand.
Would it be like wrong if she's going to tell me that
Yeah, I was
daughter's
just
doing?
gonna say, my
To do
daughter
what?
did this.
That her grades are really good, she did great on her test. Is that pride?
If she's
Well, it
bragging
depends.
about.
If I mean, bragging could be a
Bragging,
form
yeah.
of pride,
Mhm,
yeah. But
sure.
how did you? It's.
We're talking about our kids, she tells me what hers doing.
Sure, everybody
I tell her
brags
mine's
about
doing.
their kids.
And we're not, I don't
So
think
is that
it would be
sinful?
bragging, I think it's just sharing information.
Yeah,
it's
but
not-
what's it doing to your heart? That's the question.
I'm just so happy for my daughter that.
Okay, well, if it's done in happiness and joy, that's fine. But if you're telling her that because you want to one up her daughter, then that's a sin.
Oh,
Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it depends on
That's
what
a
your
very good
intent
point.
is.
Oh, yeah. No,
Right. So
I
it's
understand.
all about intent, for the most part. It's all about intent, especially when it comes to these type of passions that we deal with. Intent is a big portion
Exactly.
of it. But and we talked a couple weeks ago, last week we talked about giving compliments, and it's so important to realize that this has to do with monastics and in a monastic setting.
Yeah,
I think some
good
people were a little bit confused about that last week, and that
Yeah.
when you give, it almost sounded like St. John was saying you can't give compliments to
Right,
anybody.
yeah.
That's not what the teaching was. That in a monastery setting, you don't want to give compliments because everybody's trying to achieve
Right.
the same thing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But we're all on different spiritual spectrums out here. We all don't have the same goals as some of the monastics. So that's why we have to be very careful to when we read some of this stuff to bring it to to where we are, as
Mhm.
opposed to trying to shoot from it. Because there's Orthodox Christians that after the Bible, they're converted and they read this book and they're Orthodox for 3 weeks. And they say, I can't do what they're doing here.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that's it. So we have to just try the best that we can. That's why something like this book is very fantastic, because it takes the difficult monastic stuff that they do and tries to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but tries to bring it to our existence
Sure,
and our
sure.
level. So, but anyway,
And
that's-
yeah, and you have to, because, and again, there are the truths, there's the spiritual truths in there, and in a perfect world, yeah, we shouldn't have to compliment each other, we shouldn't have to do this, all those things, we should be like that, okay?
Right.
But we ain't.
we're not, right.
You know, some of us never will be, but, yeah, so I think that's a good question. Does that explain the difference?
Yes, if we were sharing without boasting, I
Mhm.
understand, it would be, if it was boasting,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and
What's
I mean,
the
but that same thing still goes, like, when we talk about people who say, well, I'm not gonna be, you know, I'm not telling you this to you know, gossip about somebody, but I think you should know, you know, okay, so is it really a warning? Or is this a reason to try to build yourself up at putting somebody else down? Or for some reason you're trying to attack somebody by spreading gossip or even telling truths about them that don't need to be told?
When you
So
do
that's
an
gossip.
example,
Yeah, I mean,
difference.
you make it so blatantly obvious that it's, you know, if you could be a little more subtle in your example, it'd be harder for us, for me to figure out
Well-
whether you're not sincere, but this example you just gave now was so clearly obvious that it was,
it's the extremes, but that, I mean, I think it's better in the extremes, because if I turn around and just say, hey, let me tell you about this person, and I just want you to know this because of this. Well, do you know what's in my heart? Do I know what's in your heart and how you're going to take it? No. That's why I'm using the extreme of saying, well, you know, I know that's extreme, but that's the whole idea, because I want you to understand that there are extremes to it, and even in the subtlety, there's extremes, because it depends on how you're taking it yourself, the purpose behind it, which nobody else can see but you and God, and how that person might receive it. You might be doing it all in the best of spirit for whatever reason, but that person might take it and go, oh my God, I can't believe that about that. And then next thing you know, we got some, you know, rumors going around. Someone told you something in confidence, and next thing you know, people are spreading it all around. They don't want it spread around.
Well, most of the time though, isn't when you boast or you're gonna put your children up on a pedestal. Most of the time is when somebody asks you about them. You're not gonna go say, "Oh, guess what? My son is doing." You know, don't you think that's
Well, you might.
It could, if you're,
But so that would be the one. You know, that's
Yeah.
you know that's your pride.
But
is
another thing too is
showing.
you have to guard against, you are the only one that truly knows your soul.
Mhm.
And if you know if you know that talking to somebody else about your child's accomplishments is going to lead you to a state of pride, then you just try to avoid those types of
Yeah,
situations.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with where you are. You know your spiritual life better than
Mhm.
anybody else.
Yep, and
Just
like
do
I think we talked about, then maybe next thing you know, it becomes another one-upman, and it's like, oh yeah, but let me tell you about my kid, you know,
Right.
and then pretty soon it's like this,
Then you're both sinning.
yeah. So,
You could just keep talking on your way to confession.
great, so, I'll tell you what, right now it's about 5 after, and I think we can cut off there, so,
And don't feel obligated, by the way, if you have to leave or whatever, to stay. I just,
oh, good, I gotta go.
yeah,
So,
I figured.
Everybody's gonna run.
you better lock the door, Father, because we're out of here.
Short, so we
So we'll
won't
pick
have
it
to
up
be-
on step 24. Now, I am not gonna be here
Might
next
watch-
week, I'm out of town next week.
Okay.
So, Father, do you wanna do step 24, do we wanna cancel for next week, or what do you wanna do?
Let me do next week. I'll do next week. And that we're on 24, right?
Yep, 24, we've been trying to
and
do,
then the
The
following
fire
week you may
purchase.
want to pass because
We are.
Thanksgiving.
It's not scheduled on the calendar. So
Good.
after 24, then
you wanna try to do 2? I don't know how, well, that's kinda short.
24.
Then humility's a little, well, you might be able to do
But
2.
these are pretty. Yeah.
let's
pretty
do
short.
25. I'll do humility.
Okay, 24 and
Because they
25?
kind of go hand in hand.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, because some of these do kinda go well together,
We're
so.
going to do 24 and
It just depends on how much
25.
we, if it's something we're really gonna get out of it, we're gonna have a lot of conversation and.
Well, sometimes we do, and if we don't get to the second thing, then I'll just pick it up the following week. It's not a big deal. I just wanna, because I know we're trying to, move along, and get this done by Advent. So I think right now, if we can continue at this
We're
pace, I
close,
think we,
right? How many rungs are there? 30?
30.
30, so we're on
Well, we
24th.
have the rest of November and then part of December, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll pick up a new book right
Oh.
before Lent starts, so at
We
the
do a
preparatory
couple of-
Sundays for
So
Lent.
you're gonna have enough for everybody then? You're gonna have to order some, whatever the next.
Oh, we'll
Okay.
get some, I was debating on what to do next. I almost wish that we had finished this a little earlier, because I would have loved to have done, maybe we'll do it next year, on The Incarnation by St. Athanasius.
That's
talking
good.
about-
That's a good little book.
It's a very short book, but
Yep.
it talks about the
Oh.
importance of Christmas and what this means to our
okay.
cosmic existence.
What is it?
Well,
It's on the Incarnation by St. Athanasius. It has a C.S. Lewis
Yeah, it does.
wrote a wonderful
Introduction.
introduction to it.
Really, it's
He's
just
good
it's,
stuff.
yeah, it's a tiny little book. It's that
It's
spirit. What do they
it's
call
this
it? The spirit series or
St.
something like that.
Athanasius.
I
Yeah.
don't know. St. Athanasius the Great.
Yeah.
And you know what? We might even maybe do that during Lent. It's such a wonderful book.
Nothing
you know-
lost. I mean, but yeah, you're right. If you do it during
Christmas,
during
it might mean
Christmas
a
time,
little
then
bit
it means a little bit more.
more. If everybody came to the class, I'd have a packed church.
Why don't we just put this book on hold and do this then?
No, we should finish.
Yeah, we've already put it on hold once.
Don't tell Deacon Mike that.
No. You'll come back next week. We'll already be done.
Yeah.
jump a couple
Six
rungs. We're close.
All right.
Thank you, Laura, here.
Thank you, Father.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Pray.
Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. It is truly me to bless you, O Theotokos, ever Virgin Mary, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without defilement, she gave birth to God, the Word, true Theotokos, we magnify you.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Whatever is made of ages.
Different translations, I'm sorry. It's one of those things. So anyway.